If you're looking for an indie Fire Emblem-like that will keep you occupied for dozens and dozens of hours, maybe while you wait for Fortune's Weave, Gales of Nayeli is an excellent choice. It's a very deep title with tons of replayability, and while it does have rough edges, I still highly recommend it to any SRPG fan to check out. If that's all you care to know, feel free to click away now, but if you want all the details, watch on. That said, be aware there will be story spoilers. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including comprehensive reviews of games in our favorite genre, such as Gales of Nayeli, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. So this review has been a long time in the making, due to many factors which are largely not the fault of the game. As a result, this script has gone through a few rewrites since the game's release and my initial playthrough. My apologies for the delay, but it does mean that Gales of Nayeli is in a much stronger place now than it was at launch, so pros and cons. Just wanted to let you guys know that. Thank you all so much for your patience. Now, on to the review. So what even is Gales of Nayeli? As mentioned, it's a Fire Emblem-inspired strategy RPG developed by Blind Coco Studios with heavy inspiration from the culture of the native peoples of Canada, blended with D&D style fantasy among other settings. I reviewed the demo a while back and was impressed by the wide range of mechanics on display even then, and there's a whole heck of a lot more to sink your teeth into with the full release. If you haven't seen that video, Gales of Nayeli loves personal skills, class skills, specialist weapons galore. For example, one of your starting weapons with the main character Nayeli, her personal weapon, is a wind spear with both physical melee and magical wind damage at range. And anyone who knows Fire Emblem knows that that's a little bit of a more uncommon later game weapon. You get it right from the start, it only gets crazier from there, trust me. You'll see a lot of keyworded enemies, terrain, multiple branching promotions, etc. Combine this robust suite of features with Fire Emblem's traditional tile-based gameplay, you go, I go turn structure, and a huge selection of classes and promotions associated with everything else. Fans of the genre will have plenty to chew on. The full release came a while back, as mentioned, and I've since put in about a playthrough and a half. My initial playthrough took quite a bit, as you can probably imagine, considering at the time I played it on what was the highest difficulty allowed, which slowed things down a little bit. Since that run, though, a ton of new content has been added to the game, as a new update dropped, which adds a higher difficulty mode, many new support conversations, which are actually one of my favorite aspects of the game, as we'll discuss, new side quests, a lot of new gear, and a slew of quality life improvements. So, the version of the game that you're going to play will have even more value than the one I did, and for a modest $25 US, it's not too shabby. The game is currently exclusive to Steam, do keep that in mind, and before we really get started, I need to make one thing clear. I try to keep these reviews as spoiler-free as possible, when possible. I know people like to be able to go in, enjoy the story and the setting of a game, especially games like this, for themselves, without having been spoiled on it ahead of time. I like to keep it that way when and where I can as well. However, to properly discuss this game, I need to discuss a certain major story beat that boosted my opinion of the game quite significantly when I ran into it, changed a bunch of gameplay facets, and also introduced a few problems that I want to address in the cons section of the video. As such, I need to incorporate this twist in all sections of the video. You have been warned. If you don't want to know anything more and just want to play the game for yourself, I highly recommend that you do so. I have a link for it in the description. So what is the video structure going to be? As always, we're going to do a general story overview and discussion, including that mid-game twist. Then we will discuss my cons with the game, get those out of the way, and then we'll go through the actual pros, my feedback, etc. As you might expect, there will be timestamps for everything in the description and the play bar, so if there's a particular section that you would like to jump to or reference, you may do so. In Gales of Nayeli, you have two primary protagonists in classic Fire Emblem style. Nayeli herself, who is the named character and the actual main character of the story, and then your player-created avatar. It's a fairly simple suite of options that you can choose from when designing your character, but you do get a decent selection of different types of jobs, as well as stat distributions that you're then able to ride with. Starting off the game, it has a very Fire Emblem Awakening feel, with Nayeli and her friend, I hesitate to say pet, guardian pixie Daisy, waking you up in a field and wondering where it is that you came from before getting jumped by monsters and other critters. You learn quickly that Nayeli has seen a prophecy of the end of the world and is on a quest to try and stop that by gathering what allies she can and overcoming whatever this great threat is. It seems like a very generic start because it is, but as we're going to talk about with the mid-game twist and the overall story concept, there is a reason for that. As you progress through the game, you'll wind up recruiting a number of different characters with a huge variety of different fighting styles, classes, jobs, weapon skills, etc., and fall deeper and deeper into the overall mystery and conspiracy behind what this great evil creature, literally called Bloodlust, is going to be doing to the world. For those of you who are fans of classic Fire Emblem, this more simple, enjoyable start is a great way to start getting invested in the story and the world, as it also allows you to start playing around with all the different mechanics that will come to bear very, very quickly. Even by the second or third mission, you will see a number of different options, such as leaves that if you end your turn on them, they give you +2 move at the start of your next turn, bugs that have massive defense but are weak to fire damage, fairies that cast magic at you from a distance but are weak to, typical like anti-air type things, your own light magic on your Pixie Daisy, which each spell essentially has its own type of enemy that it does effective damage against. The list goes on and scales very quickly. However, it won't take too long before you start getting the idea that there might be something more going on behind the scenes here in terms of what exactly the story entails. So we're going to talk about that before we get into the mechanics. As you progress through the first half of the game, it will still feel very classic Fire Emblem. You'll hear about how children are being abducted and experimented on. There will be side quests to go and protect villagers from bandits and marauding, corrupted creatures and the like. You'll encounter your normal suite of axe fighters and rogues. You'll have chests to break into, etc. Until suddenly, you find yourself sieging Bloodlust's lair. You come face to face with the monster herself, and you fight it out, which is weird. Like, you get your mid-battle dialogue, all of your characters chime in with something important to say. It seems like you've encountered most, if not all, of like the missing children and other characters that you were sent out to try and rescue. Seems like we've wrapped up all the loose plot threads, right? Well, you would think that, until you successfully complete the mission, and reality starts falling apart around you. Everyone starts panicking and scattering, and you collapse into the caverns below as the world seemingly falls apart around you. When you come to, you find yourself face to face with a very different type of being than anything that you've seen before, a literal cyborg/android with the name of Daisy. Not spelled the same way as your guardian fairy, but with the same orange hair. Different build, a similar type of personality. And that's when you find out that we have a multiple realities situation on our hands here, where Bloodlust has been devouring timelines one after another, where other versions of Nayeli in your party have lost and been consumed by her, only to have that reality then collapse. This is one of the rare instances where that hasn't quite happened, and as a result, in the second twist, Daisy here has been sent from the future to bring you to the future so you can team up with resistance forces that have been fighting back in a successful timeline against Bloodlust to try and put her down once and for all. When this twist happened, I was blown away, because I was so not prepared for it actually even happening, but also due to the fact that it completely flips a lot of the mechanics of the game on its head. Suddenly, you have a ton of new enemy types that are cybernetic, have bigger guns, electric powers, heavy armor, there's tanks. You have this whole fish out of water feeling with all of your characters that have just axes and swords and maybe like a flintlock pistol if you're lucky from pirates and things. And now you're fighting hooligans on bikes and robots, and you're in these cybernetic maps and all this insane stuff. The maps are now all different and have different mechanics on them, different functionality. Instead of having Gale tiles that allow you to move extra spaces, you have highways that if you are on them, you run faster down them because they're unobstructed. You'll need to pack anti-armor in terms of like actual armor to be able to destroy tanks and things. And as your characters begin to promote, you'll be able to take them down different paths that are influenced by this change in reality. Some of them can just go down a traditional fantasy promotion path, right? Like your axe fighter can become a bigger axe fighter that crits and things. Or you might be able to actually have characters pick up the ability to use cyber hardware and guns and actually delve further into this cyberpunk future where you're still fighting back like hundreds of years later against this same threat that destroyed the world in the first place. It is so cool, and there's so much nuance to the way the story develops from here that I don't really want to get into, that makes this twist such an interesting experience. The sheer amount of different assets, different types of character classes, map designs, mechanics, and everything that had to go into making this twist happen and land is astronomical, and it's one of the reasons why I do enjoy Gales of Nayeli so much, despite the rough issues that it does have. I really cannot recommend it highly enough to see exactly how Blind Coco and the team were able to make this work. It is so cool. You might think it sounds disjointed or jarring, but I promise you it flows way better than you would expect, and there's actually a lot of connecting plot threads that'll start to make a lot more sense from the first half of the game once you see this twist and start interacting with the characters that come along with it. Absolutely a job well done, and freshened up what was otherwise feeling a very classic but also very safe style game. I totally understand why so many of the standard Fire Emblem tropes were present right from the jump. Not only do we enjoy them and are they fun, it's also there to sort of lure you into a false sense of security, so when that twist really hits, it hits hard. But what about the actual game mechanics? Well, we'll talk about that next. As I mentioned, there is a ton going on here, which is not always a benefit, but I do enjoy the sheer breadth of options available to you. Every character has a set of skills that they will learn over time at different levels, and each of those level sets are different, so there's pros and cons to using different characters at different times. You have your standard set of base stats and growth rates, actual weapon skill level, etc. You're able to use certain amounts of durability to activate big, powerful effects, and some of these abilities do have different elemental properties, make attacks magical or hit multiple times. There's a lot of variety here that provides plenty of strategic depth to what it is that you're able to do it from turn to turn when approaching the enemy. Speaking of turns, as you would expect, there is a classic player phase, enemy phase system going on here. Nothing really that shakes that up, but it's perfectly fine. It does exactly what it needs to do, and every map tends to have not necessarily a gimmick, because I'm not a huge fan of gimmicky maps in Fire Emblem, but different types of approaches that you need to take, different types of enemies that are going to slow you or poison you or be difficult to navigate because they've got massive defense but poor resistance, as well as a lot of different objectives like rescuing certain characters, preventing enemies from crossing a line, being able to take out a boss, you know, what things that you would expect, but with a lot more variety than your standard Fire Emblem game. As your characters kill enemies and get XP, they will level up as you would expect, gain stats, and then yes, eventually you will be able to promote. However, promotion in this game is very varied and very interesting. Every character has at least 2, if not more, promotions, unless there's one that I encountered that is more limited, but I don't really think that there is, and the capabilities that they provide to your characters can change dramatically. Some characters will be able to promote into using magic when they never had it before, or get a mix of melee and magic when they were only a mage before. And as you progress through the story and unlock different support conversations, you may actually unlock access to completely unique classes that are locked behind those supports, rewarding you for actually having your characters bond and paying attention to what options are placed before you. There is a ton going on here. As far as your items are concerned, we did mention already that weapons do have durability, and this was initially more of an issue because weapons broke extremely quickly. Your combat arts would take a ton of durability. Some weapons like knives that have built-in brave effects and attack multiple times just didn't have the durability to stand up to that, and the whetstones that you can use to repair broken weapons were fairly few and far between. However, not long after release, Coco did put out a patch that buffed the durability of a lot of weapons, reduced the cost of a lot of different combat arts, and I think made whetstones a little bit more easy to find or cheaper to buy or something, if I remember correctly. So that's nowhere near as much of an issue anymore. And you do find and are able to buy a lot of different weapons, not only to get a variety of different effects, but also just so you have raw durability to use for killing enemies and using these big special attacks. However, like any good strategy RPG, weapons and their durability are not the only items that you're looking at. There are a ton, and I mean a ton, of different accessories in this game, some of which are just standard to the world, and many of which are hidden and actually reference different playtesters or creators who featured the game, etc. There's actually one for me in there, which is really cool, and I appreciate Coco putting that in. These accessories add a ton of different variety of playstyles to your characters as well, and have majorly powerful effects. Everything from making it so that they can walk on water tiles, to increasing the amount of damage that they do based on the number of tomes that they have in their inventory, whether they're able to use those tomes or not, notwithstanding. This leads to to a level of build crafting with all these accessories and all of these different personal skills and all of these different promotion paths that make it so each different run of Gales of Nayeli can be completely different for you. Up to like 5, 6, 7, 8 runs most likely. What your team comp is, what paths you choose to take them down, what accessories you find, buy, and give them to modify the way that they function makes every single fight very different and very interesting to approach based on what decisions you've made in the past, and I love that about it. This is absolutely one of those games where once you finish your first run, there's a very solid chance that you're going to want to load in immediately and start using different characters that you used before, or just having those characters go into different promotion paths and builds. As I did mention as well, you do have many support conversations between different characters. You can't have anyone support with anyone. They are very specific about who can be paired with who. But what I really enjoy about these support conversations is not only do they really help you to develop the characters beyond the more generic baseline conversations that a lot of them have when you first get them, which is often a problem that Fire Emblem runs into, but you also get a lot of tangible rewards from having these conversations, whether they be generic stat boosts, unlocking new promotion paths, as I discussed previously, getting new abilities for characters or new items. Pretty much anything and everything that you could imagine could happen in these conversations, and it makes them exciting to get every single time, even if you're not someone who's super invested in the story of these two characters, or just even story in general. There will be a tangible reward there. There's also just normal base conversations that can unlock side quests, items, personal objectives for characters, all sorts of things, and there are many side quests that you can choose to take on as well. Oftentimes these will introduce new characters that you'll be able to recruit, or special boss enemies that you can kill with a specific character to unlock a powerful ability unique to them. And they're a nice little refreshing, typically shorter break in between the much bigger and girthier maps that the main story tends to entail. As far as difficulty options and the like, you do have your standard suite here as well. Everything from your normal, like, easy to Fire Emblem Lunatic style modes are represented in some way, and while there is no permadeath at baseline, instead having characters rack up grievous wounds that will give them stat debuffs over time, you can turn on a setting that makes it so a grievous wound needs to be repaired with a bandage back at base before a character can be redeployed again, and bandages are fairly few and far between. If you don't have this sort of permadeath mode enabled though, you do still need bandages to remove those wounds, and they can get pretty egregious to make some of your favorite characters really feel far more humble than they maybe would be if you didn't have them, full of holes and with multiple broken bones. And no matter which way you choose to play, I do enjoy it. You're never at risk of permanently losing a character, but needing to balance your resources to either bring characters who were wounded back into the roster at all, or even just make them able to function at the level that you need them to, especially if you're playing on higher difficulties, makes that resource management and the need to take care of units mid-mission still very important, and I like the balance that's been struck here with it. I am always a lover of permadeath, don't get me wrong, but if you're going to have a game where you don't have true permadeath, I think this is still a good way to keep stakes high from mission to mission. So that's the mechanics discussion. Next, I want to talk about our audio, OST, visual design, art style, etc. briefly before we get into the major cons and the major pros. Partially because a lot of the discussion in those two sections will be centered around the art style, the art, the audio, etc., and the overall game feel. Visually, the game is a classic pixel art style Fire Emblem title, right? Maps are detailed with a lot of different variety in terrain and setup. As I mentioned when we were discussing promotions, every single character has their own unique combat sprites and their own unique busts that change over time as you promote them. And the combat animations in particular, I really enjoy. They flow very well, they're all very unique. There's a lot of variety with different crit animations, weapon types, different magic spells, all have their own unique attacks. It's a very visually stimulating game in that regard. As far as audio and OST, I have no complaints. There's definitely some tracks that will get a little repetitive over time due to the fairly limited scope and the fact that the game is so very long, but there are also some more unique tracks and just your general map music in general that are absolutely banger earworms that will stay in your head for the rest of your life, I promise you. I always consider it a good sign when I'm away from a game for a little while and then I decided to boot it up again for footage or just to play or whatever, and the music hits and I immediately have a smile come across my face. It just strikes that familiar chord. It's always a good sign for a game like this, and Gales of Nayeli definitely lands that. Now, that's the general overview of things out of the way, so let's talk cons and then we'll talk pros, because I do have a fair bit to discuss on both sides of things here. And you obviously heard a lot of my praise for the game already throughout, so maybe the pros won't be as long, but still I want to pinpoint a couple things I really enjoy. That said, cons first. As I mentioned, This is a very long game. Gales of Nayeli is a game that demands that you pay attention to it and get really sunk into everything that it has going on. And I imagine for some people, this could be an issue, especially in the first half as maps get longer and you haven't really fully encountered the breadth of the story and the mechanics. It can start to drag a little bit. It did for me, and I imagine it will for a lot of other people as well. And of course, that's always the struggle with any sort of game that really swings into full gear midway through, is like, well, okay, but I have to get through the early stuff that's still fun, but maybe doesn't have the variety that it feels like it could. And I think that Gales of Nayeli does have that feeling to it. The variety of mission types and the sheer number of characters that you will recruit along the way definitely do help, but maps are very large, and especially if you don't turn off some animations or speed up some things in the settings, it can take quite a while once you start getting to some of the larger maps that are available. This is in part due to the density of the mechanics as well, which can also be a bit off-putting until you get into the flow of the game. It's a boon overall, but a bit more of a gentle curve in terms of how many things are introduced, how quickly, and the overall ceiling of just how many different mechanics and abilities and functionalities there are. It can be a lot, and you get a lot of characters in this game, so it can be hard to really figure out exactly who has what and how you're supposed to or want to play them in a team until you've put a lot of time into the game and it starts to click for you more. Some map objectives also are a bit of a drag. For example, there's one mission early on in the game where you need to escort a merchant through a swamp, and you just gotta let him trundle his way through. He moves at his own pace, and you'll basically just be clearing out enemies around him as he winds his way from the top left-ish of the map to the bottom middle right-ish. And it takes quite a while. There's very few ways of speeding him up. You might be able to like reposition chain him forward a little bit occasionally, but it still takes quite a while, and when the threat of the enemies isn't particularly pressuring, it can get a tad on the dull side sometimes. Swing back around to the story for a second, it does again at first come off as very generic, and I would not be surprised if someone who's coming into the game fresh starts rolling their eyes when the main villain is literally named Bloodlust. After finishing the game, I do think, again, this is an intelligent move and a strength, but that's only something you learn with time, and I worry that it's a gamble that'll put off some players before they really understand the value of what's being presented. The two biggest issues that I want to talk about are the art quality and the actual game engine and how it plays. First of all, the art can be hit or miss. Some character portraits are very nice and very well done. I'm particularly a fan of Carrie as an early game character, while others look far less clean and more sketch-like. It's something that I can absolutely see taking people out of the experience, and so many folks are so very visually focused, especially when you have a highly character-driven game like a strategy RPG. Now, I want to couch that, though, by saying there is a huge number of different busts and sprites in Gales of Nayeli. I cannot even begin to imagine the amount of time that it would take to draw all of these, and considering that they were largely drawn by one person, I can totally understand why maybe some less important characters were a little less catered to than like big name main characters, right? I totally understand that. But I do feel it does need to be pointed out, as so very often people are very heavily critical of the visual style and the art quality of a game, and if they find it lacking in any way, fairly or not, they can oftentimes drop a title. As a result, I feel like it's worth mentioning here. Really though, the single biggest issue with Gales of Nayeli is an engine issue. Once you get a few missions into the game, the whole thing starts to chug. And this is an issue that has been improved with quality of life changes, from what I understand, compressing of assets to just have less things that the engine is trying to load, etc. But enemies will take forever to decide their actions. The game itself sometimes would occasionally like lock up or freeze. Inputs can absolutely be delayed, or the game won't register how you moved your mouse before clicking, causing you to click incorrect menu options or move units improperly. Seeing as how the game allows you to save at the beginning of every turn if you so choose to essentially create save states, it's not terrible. It just gets a little frustrating at times when you're starting to get into the flow of the game and suddenly something isn't being clicked on or moved where you want it to, or you're sitting waiting for something to happen and the game is seemingly just thinking about what it's going to be doing. Again, this was much worse when I first played through the game and a lot of these changes and improvements had not been made, but even now, going back through recently and getting about halfway through a run, I definitely still notice it, and it's not an issue with my PC, I promise you. Again, given how sensitive people are to game feel and input and everything, I know this is going to be a problem for some players, so it absolutely does need to be mentioned. It's unfortunate, but it kind of shows the ambition at the same time of the title. It has so much stuff in it and good stuff at that, that the engine itself is struggling to maintain it and present it properly. Does it prevent the game from being playable? Absolutely not, but it's something that you will probably run into from time to time. Now, with the cons out of the way, though, I want to talk about everything else that I love, and that is literally everything else in the game. As I mentioned, I adore all of the combat animations. All of the character battle sprites are phenomenal and extremely varied. There are a ton of different types of enemies to sink your teeth into and figure out how to handle. There's a ton of unique types of character classes that are super interesting as well, from harpies to pirates that summon octopi that you can use as pets, to a literal squirrel girl that has a forest spirit as a familiar who runs around and gives you extra combat capabilities, necromancers who use dark magic and summon skeletons, and cavalry and witches that have guns and magic staff healing, which is very interesting. Again, that ties into the twist later. Martial artists with crazy punching attacks, thieves and rogues who use knives, mages of all shapes and sizes. The list goes on, and it means that throughout the entirety of the game, every single time you recruit a new character, you have a new tool in your arsenal and something fun to play around with, and I do love that as an option. There was obviously so much love and care and attention that was put into every single one of these characters to add a new way to play the game and a new way to flesh out your party, and it makes for such a strong and varied experience. There's a level of flavor and uniqueness in Gales of Nayeli that I've never experienced in another strategy RPG before, especially one that is very much couched in Fire Emblem style gameplay and classes and the like, and makes the game stand out extremely well. Like, in what other game can I have my companion fairy, who is a combination of a healer, a light magic user, and a flyer, go through the entire game with me, never be broken in any way, but still extremely valuable and useful, only to then have a particular support path with one character who you may or may not have recruited or even be using when you get to the far future after the twist, and have her be inspired by the styles and the culture of the time due to discussing with that character who she can get into a romance with if you so choose. You don't even need to have that happen, only to then unlock the ability to have her use dark magic and get a completely different style and suite of abilities. That is a level of dedication for letting players craft their teams and their stories the way that they want that I have never seen before in the strategy RPG space, and it is one of the top reasons why I do recommend that anyone who loves this style of game play Gales of Nayeli. Beyond that, the breadth of the story and the depth of some of these characters who you would expect to be so basic is extremely impressive. There are characters that I just wrote off as the dumb muscle, who I've now gone through and been using in my second run, who get so many interesting conversations and have, again, so much characterization and growth to them that you never would have expected, and you would never find in Fire Emblem in most titles. Every character has a storyline, every character has their own motivations and drive and history, and you can learn about any of them, and it's so cool. People are going to have so many different favorite characters that are completely unique to them compared to anyone else who's played the game, just because there's so much to discover about all of them, and they somehow still feel like they all fit together into this world. Despite jumping realities and progressing through timelines and blending fantasy with future, Fire Emblem with D&D and cyberpunk, it all meshes, and that, I don't even know how you pull that off. Even the motivations of Bloodlust as a villain get very interesting and start falling into cosmic horror and entropy and self-loathing. I don't want to get too into it, but you really gotta appreciate how strong Bloodlust's characterization and narrative progression is from the beginning of the game to the end of the game. She's a very compelling villain that is a phenomenal example of hubris and outstripping one's purpose. That was very cool to see. Between this dedicated section and my general discussion throughout the rest of the video, I hope it's plain to see just how much I love Gales of Nayeli. And I think that so long as certain issues, such as maybe some more questionable quality for some of the character art, or again, some issues with the game engine, if those things don't get you, you're in for a phenomenal experience with this title. And again, the amount of content you'll get out of it for $25 US is absolutely off the wall. If you're a person who's very time to dollar oriented, oh, you have a big value option on your hands here. Let me tell you. There is a demo if you would like to check that out first, and then again, the full release. I'll have links to both in the description of the video. If you have played Gales of Nayeli, or you decide to pick it up and check it out as a result of this video, let me know your thoughts about it down in the comments. Strike up a conversation. If you have your own either praise or constructive feedback to provide to the team, put it there too. I'm sure they would appreciate to hear your guys' thoughts. And I'd be curious to see what you all think of the game as well. Do you enjoy it just as much as me? More? Less? Talk about it all. I'll be down there in the comments as well for sure. For now though, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope that you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there, everybody. And remember, be good to each other, y'all. Bye now.